Everybody, hope you're having an awesome day today. So welcome to the third and final part in the breakdown of my newest track, Chief of the Sky. And if you haven't watched the first two parts yet, where I discuss the theory and the music behind the track, and the second part where we talk about the orchestration and the arrangement, please do that so. I'll put those in the description box below. And then come back and watch this third part where we'll talk about one of my favorite parts of the music making process, mixing and processing. And essentially what mixing really is, it's kind of balancing the tracks and shaping the sounds in a way so that they work really, really well together and enhance the overall track. So what are the different aspects of mixing? Well, we have where we have to shape the sound to the way we want it. So that's with EQ, where you can boost and cut different frequencies. So you can make something sound a little sharper and brighter, or you can make something sound more mellow and warm. And then there's also compressing, where let's say you wanted to put a compressor on a piano. What it does is it actually lowers the dynamic range, overall dynamic range of the piano. And then those, the loudest parts you've basically brought down to be softer. And then if you want to make up that gain that you lost, or the volume, you bring the overall level of the piano up. So the piano, the softest parts are now brought up, so the overall track is louder, but overall it's more consistent in volume. That's the idea of the compressor. And then we also have reverb, which is very, very important in orchestral music, where we have to put the tracks in a space, so a room, for example, or a concert hall, right? And that's what we do with reverb here. And you can see here I'm using east-west spaces, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So let's get straight into it. So what I did before I did any processing whatsoever is I kind of prepared my tracks. When I was producing it, I had all the tracks in green and stuff, and I was basically trying to output my ideas as quickly as possible, and so all the tracks were green. And to be fair, it did kind of slow my process down a little bit, so I think it might be best if I group the tracks by color in the very beginning. But the point is, just make sure you group your tracks by color, as early as possible, so very quickly, yellow is strings, for example, or blue is woodwinds, red brass, and perk can be brown. So that's just my way of looking at it. Anyway, let's go on. So you can see here, what I've done is all these tracks over here, by the way, these are just the MIDI tracks. I've actually bounced all of these tracks to audio. So that's all of these over here. These are the ones that I've actually processed. And I'm in Logic, so I'm using the stock EQ, which is basically the EQ that comes with Logic. And you'll actually notice a pattern in most of these tracks here, if not all, except this one here. I've basically applied a high pass filter to every single track. And I consider this a preparation. So what I do is I actually solo each track. So let's say, which track is this on? What is this? Violin, octaves, legato. Okay, let's see if I can find it. Violin, octaves, this one. Yeah. What I'll do is I'll actually solo it, find a part where I can actually listen to it together. Oh, hang on. Where is it? So right there. What I'll do is I'll listen to the track by itself, and then I'll grab a frequency band in the EQ, and I'll actually push it up, narrow the Q, so I can, be affecting a more specific frequency range. And I'll kind of brush it along the top here until I can find a frequency that doesn't sound so good to me. So for example, in this case, I'm at 830 Hertz. And so originally I kind of brought it up, and then as I was playing the track, I was listening for something that didn't sound so good. So here, I boosted up the 780 Hertz, and I didn't really like the boxiness of this sound here. It sounded kind of muffled and just too boxy in a way. So what I did is actually brought it down. I have a couple decibels to get rid of that frequency a little bit. And now as a result, it's a little more clear, it's a little less roomy sounding. There's not quite as much boxiness. And so in effect, I've actually taken out that offending frequency. And in the bottom here, it's common knowledge that you can't actually hear anything below 20 Hertz. Just human hearing works that way. So it doesn't hurt to just high pass or take out the low frequencies below that range. So for every single track, I've applied, to a degree, some kind of high pass filter to take out the absolute lowest frequencies that we don't need. And it's funny because some of the tracks I was looking at, and you wouldn't expect them to have any deep low end, like violins, for example. I pulled up a violin track, and then it showed around 1 or 2K the violins are playing in their range, but at the very bottom in the sub range there was actually a little bit of a rise, and so a high pass filter got rid of that. Because if you have a whole bunch of sub frequencies building up, in multiple tracks, then that's just going to make the whole thing kind of muddy and just not clean, right? And this is something that I've done starting in this track. I actually didn't do that in my previous tracks. What I did was I relied on a plugin called Mix-Centric from Waves. And what it actually did was it cleaned up the low end for me, and it kind of just applied some saturation, compression, all that stuff, kind of like a mixed finisher. But it's good practice to be able to do this yourself, and I learned this from Jake Jackson, the Spitfire audio mixing engineer. He teaches this as well. So after I did that, I found that my whole thing just sounded clearer in general, and I hadn't even started mixing yet, right? I was just preparing the tracks so that each of the instruments sounded the very best on their own. And then what I do is I do something called top-down mixing, which I learned from Graham Cochran from the Recording Revolution. His channel is amazing. So all that is basically I start by processing on the mix bus, where all the instruments come to this. So the stereo out is the final frontier, you can say. So everything comes to the stereo out. So for example, if I put a plugin on the stereo out, that means every single instrument in the mix will be affected by whatever I put on. So this direction mixer is it's a stock Logic plugin, but it basically pans everything to mono. So before, it was all stereo, and then I brought it down to mono. So then with it on, it sounds like this. So you can hear how up the middle everything is now, right? And mixing in mono is actually a good practice because this forces you to make sure the decisions that you're actually making are real decisions. So if you can hear the difference that you're making in mono, where everything is just up the middle, then when you put it back into stereo, where everything will fill out in the rest of the frequency range or the stereo field, it'll be much more obvious when you put it back to stereo. So this just kind of eliminates any mindless mixing, like stuff that you wouldn't actually tell is actually doing anything. So I put that on first, and then I tweaked. I actually put the mix-centric on last, and I found that as I turned it up, it actually made the mix sound pretty brittle and bright in a way that wasn't quite appealing to me. So I actually removed that, and that kind of proves that that plugin is not for everything. However, if I didn't do all these EQ moves, I probably wouldn't have taken off the mix-centric because it usually does that job for me, but I did this anyway, and I found I didn't need that actually. I had a compressor here, and I chose the Studio VCA preset because I like the sound of this. So I set it to -10 as the threshold. So if I go to a loud part here, let's see. Let's see what it's doing. So it's doing a little bit. I think I might have turned it down at the very end, but what I usually do is I turn it to a certain threshold, so it's doing about maybe 0.5 to 1 decibels of gain reduction. So it's kind of just pushing down the very top peak levels of the track. And then I'll turn off the auto gain because Logic's compressor just does that. It makes up the gain for you, but it's always better for you to control it yourself. And then I turned everything up 0.5 decibels. So like we said, the compressor basically pushes down the very peaks that you want, and then you can bring up everything just a little bit to match in level to make up that gain that you just lost. The ratio here kind of tells you how hard the compressor will be hitting the mix, right? So if it's like, for example, 8 to 1, then for every decibel I'm compressing, the mix will be squashed 8 times that amount. And so this is just kind of a light setting here. the attack is kind of modest. It's, you know, it's not super quick, so that the compressor activates right away and everything's just crushed really fast. So it gives a little bit of breathing room, and the release is kind of just a standard setting here. But let's keep going on. So after that, these two tracks just come with the one of the instruments I use. I think it's the, I don't remember actually, maybe a piano plugin or something. I find that these two tracks kind of pop up a lot. Anyway, let's go into these buses here. So these group buses I created after I prepared these tracks. So after I was about to start mixing, I created these tracks. So I made one auxiliary track for each group of the orchestra, so for each section. And then I actually changed the output of each section. So for example here, you see these harp glissando all the way to the children's choir. I changed all these outputs to bus 5, which is the extras right there, the extras bus here. So that means if I put anything on the bus 5, it will actually affect everything here because, you know, all of these tracks are now influenced by this bus over here. Okay, so that's what we did for the rest of the instrument sections, and I kind of put an EQ on each one. And let's open all of these really quickly. So I used the FabFilter Pro EQ, Pro Q2, and I mean, I could have easily done the Logic EQ as well, but I just used this one since I have it. So you can see for 3 of them, I actually put a high pass filter on just to make sure there wasn't any, you know, low rumble or stuff. The perk I actually didn't, because the perk is what I wanted me to give that meat and the sub feeling, right? So if I cut out the perk as well, then basically I'll have nothing in the very low ends to give it that oomph, extra oomph. In this case, I just made a couple of, you know, tweaking decisions. You know, I wanted, you know, this range here to kind of come up, give it a bit of sheen and shine. And you can see here for all the EQs, there's a bit of a high shelf here. This one is a notch, but it doesn't really matter. In any case, I'm just tweaking it so I get rid of more low end, push up a bit of the highs to make it sparkle. And yeah, that's really what I just did with that. And then for the brass, I put in a bit of analog saturation, and that's what this tone centric does from Wells. You turn it up a little bit, it adds some harmonics, and it'll make your tracks sound a little bit more like as if they were processed by an analog unit, which can be pretty useful. And then what we have here is the East-West Spaces 2. And what you can do here is you can go to the presets and choose all these different halls. But a really popular one in Spaces 1 was the San Francisco Hall. And when I tested it on the instruments, it actually sounded really good. So what I did was, I basically, you know, put it on here, turn the wet up. I probably should have put it on 100%, honestly, but I kind of put it at negative 8.5. So it has a healthy amount of reverb signal. And then basically what I did was the instruments that I wanted to be more wet, I put a send on that track. So for example, the Cinebrass trumpet ensemble sounds like this. If I turn off the send, it sounds like this. So you can hear, obviously, it's a little drier, right? And there's less room sound on it. So I sent a copy of the trumpet ensemble to the reverb, and then back on the track, which is over here, I basically turned it up from all the way to the bottom until I heard enough of the reverb signal. Then I left it as is. So this is a better option than applying an instance of reverb on every single track you want to have more reverb. It saves you a lot of CPU power, and it's, you know, just a lot more efficient for your workflow, honestly. You send a copy of your audio to the reverb, and then you can tweak how much of the reverb you want to hear on that track just by turning it up. So in this case, I have negative 5.4 there. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it. So I've talked about, you know, how I do top-down mixing. I start from the very end, and I felt that I didn't want to do too much actually, because after doing these EQ moves and stuff, the mix actually sounded pretty good already. So I put on the compressor, it kind of evened everything out just a touch. I put on the reverb, sent all the things I needed, over to there and then tweaked the individual tracks reverb levels. And then I processed the group bus next. So I'm basically working my way down from largest to smallest, right? So the next in line would be the group buses, and then I put an EQ on those. I put some analog touches on the brass in general. And then if there was anything else I wanted to, affect a little more, and then I could go to the individual track and then process it how I like. So here in the claps, I actually put a decapitator on it from Sound Toys, and let's see what it sounds like actually by itself. Right? It has that sound to it. If I turn it off, there's just a very standard ensemble clap. But if I put it on, you just get that distortion, and that's what that plugin really does. It distorts what you want, and that punish knob really takes it into overdrive. So let's see, do we have any other examples? So there's a channel EQ. Yeah, see, look, I mean, I don't really have any other plugins on there. It's just, most of what I've done is really just send the individual tracks to the reverb, because once you get all the tracks sounding as if they're all in one room, that's what really makes it convincing that you might have a realistic orchestra, or a real orchestra just playing your music. If all your strings, brass, woodwinds, and percussion are in one room except for one instrument, let's say a solo flute is playing and it's bone dry, right? That it's clear that flute is recorded separately, or it's samples. So if you make sure that everything has a healthy amount of reverb on it, depending on the room that you're choosing, then it'll sound very consistent, and then it's more convincing that that you've got a good mix, and that everything was recorded live. That's the impression we're trying to give. So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions, please let me know. I think the biggest takeaway, though, for me, the biggest learning experience this time was seeing how much doing an EQ on each of my tracks did for me. It tightened up that low end. It took out any muddiness, and I was able to hear everything just that much more clearly. And after that, I didn't really have to do much more after that. Touch of compression and whatever. And that's really all it took. But that's the power of EQ, guys. So take advantage of it. It's super duper helpful. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I am planning to do a separate mixing basics series in the future, which is super duper fun. I'm really looking forward to that. Please let me know if you have any more suggestions. I'd be more than happy to hear them. And yeah, I mean, that's what this channel is for us to grow together and to learn. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.